The rain-slicked streets of Detroit's east side gleamed like black mirrors under the streetlights. Sarah Mitchell pressed herself against the cold brick wall of the abandoned warehouse, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Blood seeped through her torn uniform, the same maid's dress she'd worn for 3 years while cleaning the offices of one of the city's most powerful men. In her trembling hands, she clutched a leather bag that held secrets worth killing for. Secrets that could bring down an empire built on lies, corruption, and the broken backs of the invisible. The roar of motorcycles shattered the night. Chrome and leather materialized from the darkness, the Detroit chapter of the Hells Angels, returning from a late-night run. Sarah knew their reputation, dangerous men who lived by their own code, feared by many, understood by few. She had one chance. Stumbling into the street, she collapsed in front of the lead bike. The massive machine screeched to a halt inches from her body. The rider, a mountain of a man with arms like tree trunks and eyes that had seen too much, dismounted slowly. "Please," Sarah gasped, holding up the bag with the last of her strength. "They killed my daughter. Everything is in here. But they're coming. There." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. The biker, his patch-red tank, looked down at this bleeding woman in a maid's uniform, then at his brothers behind him. In 30 years of riding, he'd seen plenty of people in trouble. But something in her eyes, a mother's rage mixed with desperate hope, made him pause. "Who's coming?" he asked, his voice like gravel. "Everyone," she whispered. "The mayor, the police chief, she coughed, blood speckling her lips. "My daughter found out. She was only 19. They made it look like an overdose, but she never even took aspirin without asking." Tank's jaw tightened. He had a daughter once. Another biker, younger with intricate tattoos covering his neck, stepped forward. "Tank, we can't get involved in." "Shut up, Inc., Tank growled. He knelt beside Sarah. "What's in the bag?" "Proof," she said. "But if they find me, it all disappears. Just like my baby girl disappeared." The sirens were 2 blocks away now. Tank made a decision that would change everything. He scooped Sarah up like she weighed nothing and carried her to his bike. "Church meeting," he barked to his brothers. "Now." As they roared away into the night, Sarah's bag tucked safely in Tank's saddlebag, none of them knew they were about to uncover a conspiracy that went to the very heart of Detroit's power structure. Or that the contents of that bag would force these hardened men to confront their own assumptions about justice, redemption, and what it truly means to protect the innocent. The truth, when it came, would leave them all silent. The story. 3 weeks before that rain-soaked night, Sarah Mitchell's world had been different. Not perfect, a single mother working 2 jobs never had perfect, but stable. Predictable. She cleaned the offices of Morrison Industries from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m., then caught 3 hours of sleep before her day's shift at the diner. Her daughter Keisha was her everything. 19 years old, full scholarship to Wayne State, studying journalism with a fire in her belly to change the world. Sarah had raised her alone after Keisha's father died in Afghanistan, had scraped and saved and sacrificed so her baby girl could have better. "Mama, you can't keep killing yourself like this," Keisha had said that last morning, watching Sarah ice her swollen feet. "When I graduate, I'm getting us out of here. Somewhere with a garden. Somewhere you can rest." Sarah had smiled, touching her daughter's face. "Baby, seeing you succeed is all the rest I need." That was Tuesday. By Friday, Keisha was dead. The police said overdose. Heroin laced with fentanyl, found in an alley behind a club she'd never frequented. Sarah knew with every fiber of her being, that it was a lie. Keisha had watched addiction destroy too many friends to ever touch drugs. She'd been working on something for the school paper, staying late at the library, asking questions about city contracts and missing funds. "Sometimes stories are dangerous, Mama," she'd said the week before. "But that's exactly why they need to be told." Sarah had nodded, proud and worried in equal measure. Now, standing in the morgue, identifying her baby's body, that pride curdled into something darker. The funeral was small. Sarah couldn't afford much, and Keisha's father's family had long since moved away. As they lowered the casket, Sarah noticed men in expensive suits watching from a distance. When she approached them, they melted away like shadows. That night, she returned to Morrison Industries. The building loomed against the sky, all glass and steel and secrets. She moved through the offices like a ghost, emptying trash cans, wiping down surfaces, trying not to think about how Keisha used to call during her breaks just to hear her mother's voice. It was in the executive conference room that she found it. Marcus Morrison himself had been there late, meeting with men Sarah recognized from the newspaper, the police chief, 2 city councilmen, a judge. They'd left in a hurry, forgetting to lock the door, forgetting that the invisible woman who cleaned their messes might notice things. On the table was a leather bag, expensive and out of place. Sarah knew she should leave it, knew that curiosity in places like this was dangerous. But something made her look inside. Files. Photographs. USB drives. And there, paperclipped to a folder marked, Problems, was Keisha's student ID photo with a red X drawn across her face. Sarah's knees buckled. She sank into one of the plush chairs, hands shaking as she read. Her daughter had been investigating a network of corruption that ran from Morrison Industries through City Hall and into the police department. Millions in city funds diverted. Drug money laundered through construction contracts. And at the center of it all, Marcus Morrison, the man whose toilets she scrubbed, whose coffee stains she removed, whose secrets she just uncovered. The last document was a police report, predated for the following week, describing Sarah Mitchell's suicide following her daughter's tragic overdose. Grief-stricken mother, history of depression, no suspicion of foul play. They were going to kill her too. Sarah's grief crystallized into something harder than diamond. She took the bag, stuffed it under her uniform, and finished her shift. If they were watching, she'd give them nothing to see. Just another invisible woman doing invisible work. But when she clocked out, instead of going home to the apartment where death waited, she disappeared into the maze of Detroit's forgotten places. For 3 days, she moved like a hunted animal. The money in her account was frozen, computer error, the bank said. Her phone was dead, her sister wouldn't answer the door. The net was closing. She slept in abandoned buildings, ate from dumpsters, kept the bag close. The evidence inside could bring them all down, but only if she could get it to someone who wasn't already bought and paid for. That's when she remembered the Hells Angels. Everyone feared them, which meant they couldn't be bought. They lived outside the system that had killed her daughter. And Tank, she'd seen him once at the diner, quietly paying for a homeless veteran's meal. There was honor there, beneath the leather and chrome. So on that rain-soaked night, bleeding from where she'd torn herself climbing through razor wire to escape Morrison's security team, Sarah Mitchell threw herself on the mercy of the Angels. The Hells Angels clubhouse squatted on the outskirts of Detroit like a fortress of rebellion. Corrugated metal walls covered in graffiti, bikes lined up like soldiers, the rumble of engines a constant heartbeat. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and tension. Tank laid Sarah on a worn pool table, her blood staining the green felt. "Doc," he barked. "Need you now." An older biker with steady hands and a medic's bag appeared. He'd been a combat medic in Vietnam, patched up brothers in rice paddies and jungle clearings. A maid with a gunshot graze was nothing new. "Clean wound," Doc muttered, working quickly. "She'll live if infection doesn't set in." "The bag," Sarah whispered, fighting to stay conscious. "Look in the bag." Tank appended the leather satchel on the bar. Files scattered across scarred wood. The bikers gathered around, these men who'd seen violence and corruption, who thought nothing could surprise them anymore. They were wrong. Ink picked up a photograph, Morrison shaking hands with known cartel members. "Jesus," he breathed. "Look at this." Chains, the club's treasurer, held up financial documents. They're washing drug money through city construction projects. Millions. Tank found the file on Keisha Mitchell. Her investigation notes, meticulously detailed. The girl had been brilliant, fearless. She'd traced the money, identified the players, been days away from publishing when they silenced her. They killed a kid, Reaper, the club president, said quietly. A kid trying to do right. The room fell silent. These men had done things, hard things, but there were lines. Killing children was one of them. Sarah stirred, her eyes focusing on Tank. They're going to kill more, she said. There's a list. Everyone who asks questions. Everyone who won't play along. Why bring this to us? Reaper asked. Why not the feds? Sarah laughed bitterly. The feds? Half of them are on Morrison's payroll. The others would need warrants, procedures, time I don't have. You. She looked around the room, you're the only ones they can't buy or threaten. We're not heroes, lady, Chain said. No, Sarah agreed. But you're not them either. Tank stood slowly. At 6'4" and 300 pounds, he commanded attention. My daughter died at 19-2, he said. Car accident. Drunk driver with connections walked free. He looked at his brothers. I couldn't do anything then. Maybe I can now. This ain't our fight, someone muttered from the back. Since when do we let them decide what our fight is? Tank shot back. They think they own this city. Think they can kill kids and buy their way out. He picked up Keisha's photo. This girl had more balls than half the men in this room. She stood up. Maybe it's time we did too. Reaper was quiet for a long moment. The club had survived by staying out of politics, out of crusades. But looking at the evidence spread before them, at the systematic destruction of anyone who threatened the powerful, something shifted. Take a vote, he said finally. All in favor of helping her? One by one, hands raised. Not all, but enough. Then we do this smart, Reaper said. They've got badges and banks. We've got brothers. Over the next hours, they planned. The evidence needed to reach someone clean, someone with power but without connections to Morrison. They identified a federal prosecutor in Chicago, known for taking down corrupt politicians. But getting the information to her would be like running a gauntlet. They'll be watching the roads, Inc. said. Morrison's got cops on payroll from here to the state line. Then we don't take the roads they expect, Tank replied. Sarah listened from the pool table, fighting waves of pain and exhaustion. These men, these outlaws society feared, were risking everything for a woman they didn't know and a girl they'd never met. Why? She asked Tank during a quiet moment. He was cleaning his gun, movements practiced and precise. Because everyone thinks we're monsters, he said. Maybe we are. But monsters can choose which other monsters to hunt. Dawn was breaking, gray and uncertain. They'd moved Sarah to a back room, Doc checking her wound every hour. The bleeding had stopped, but she was weak, feverish. Tank sat beside her, this giant of a man strangely gentle. Tell me about your daughter. Sarah's eyes filled. She was everything good I ever did. Smart, brave, kind. She used to say journalism was about giving voice to the voiceless. A tear slipped down her cheek. She gave her life for it. No, Tank corrected. They took her life. There's a difference. Outside, bikes roared to life. The plan was in motion. Half the club would create distractions across the city, drawing Morrison's attention. The other half would escort Tank and the evidence to Chicago. But Morrison was already moving. The first sign was a news report. Suspected terrorist Sarah Mitchell, wanted in connection with the theft of classified documents. Her picture filled the screen, alongside images of the Hells Angels. Armed and extremely dangerous. Do not approach. They're framing us, Chain spat. Of course they are, Reaper said calmly. Question is, what do we do about it? Sarah struggled to sit up. I won't let you all go down for this. I'll turn myself in, say I forced. Shut up, Tank said, not unkindly. We don't abandon family. I'm not your family. You are now. The police arrived at noon. Not a few cars, but a full tactical response. Morrison had called in every favor, painted the Angels as domestic terrorists harboring a dangerous fugitive. This is Commander Walsh, a bullhorn announced. You're surrounded. Send out Sarah Mitchell and surrender peacefully. Inside, the bikers checked weapons, prepared for war. But Sarah had other plans. I need to speak to them, she said. Like hell, Tank growled. Listen to me, Sarah's voice carried surprising strength. They want me silent. Dead or arrested, it doesn't matter. But if I can speak, if I can tell the truth where people can hear. She pointed to the news vans gathering beyond the police perimeter. Morrison had wanted a spectacle. She'd give him one. Reaper considered. It's suicide. My daughter's already dead, Sarah said simply. What else can they take? They rigged a speaker system, patching it through the club's PA. Sarah, supported by Tank, stood at a reinforced window. When she spoke, her voice carried across the police lines to the cameras beyond. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm a mother whose daughter was murdered for asking questions. Keisha Mitchell, 19 years old, journalism student, killed because she discovered the truth about Marcus Morrison and his network of corruption. The police shifted uneasily. This wasn't the script. Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. I have evidence. Documents, recordings, proof that Morrison Industries has been laundering drug money, that city officials have been taking bribes, that anyone who threatens their empire is eliminated. Cut the feed, someone screamed over the police radio. But the news crews were rolling, broadcasting live. Sarah held up document after document, each one a nail in Morrison's coffin. They killed my baby, she said, tears streaming. Made it look like an overdose. How many other mothers have lost children? How many other families destroyed to protect their secrets? Tank handed her more files. She read names, dates, amounts. The careful architecture of corruption laid bare in a mother's grieving voice. Then the shooting started. Not from the police, they were frozen, unsure. The shots came from the rooftops, Morrison's private security deciding to end this outside official channels. Tank pulled Sarah down as windows shattered. The Angels returned fire, disciplined and deadly. This wasn't their first firefight, but it might be their last. Go! Reaper shouted. Back exit. Now! Tank scooped up Sarah and the evidence. A group of brothers formed a protective wedge, moving through smoke and chaos. They reached the garage where bikes waited, engines hot. Chicago's out, Inc. yelled over the gunfire. They'll have the routes blocked. Then we go somewhere else, Tank decided. Somewhere they won't expect. Sarah, barely conscious, whispered, the journalist. Keisha's mentor at the paper. Elena Rodriguez. She's clean, she's fearless. Where? Canada. Windsor. Just across the river. It was insane. Running for the Canadian border with half of Detroit's law enforcement in pursuit. But insane was all they had left. The ride was a blur of speed and danger. Bikes weaving through traffic, police cars spinning out, helicopters overhead. The Angels rode like demons, protecting the bike carrying Tank and Sarah. At the Ambassador Bridge, border security moved to block them. But something unexpected happened. The news of Sarah's broadcast had spread. Citizens, angry and awakened, had surrounded the bridge approaches. They recognized injustice when they saw it, and they weren't letting Morrison win again. Let them through, someone shouted. Justice for Keisha, another voice took up. The crowd surged forward, not violent but insistent. Cars blocked police vehicles. People filmed everything. The border guards, overwhelmed and confused, hesitated just long enough. Tank's bike roared across the bridge, Sarah clutched against him, the leather bag secure. Behind them, their brothers held the line, a wall of chrome and leather between them and Morrison's reach. On the Canadian side, Elena Rodriguez waited. The journalist stood small but fierce, her camera crew ready. She'd been Keisha's mentor, had watched the brilliant young woman develop her investigative skills. When the news broke, she'd known exactly where Sarah would run. "Ms. Mitchell," Elena said as Tank lifted Sarah from the bike. "Your daughter was the bravest person I ever taught. Let's finish what she started." The interview was raw, devastating. Sarah, propped in a wheelchair, her maid's uniform still blood-stained, spoke directly to the camera. She showed each document, explained each connection. Elena asked the hard questions, drew out details that painted a picture of systemic corruption so vast it seemed impossible. "They thought I was invisible," Sarah said. "Just another black woman cleaning their offices. They spoke freely around me, planned their crimes while I emptied their trash. They never imagined I was listening. They never thought Keisha's mother would fight back." Tank stood guard behind her, his presence a silent threat to anyone who might try to silence her again. The other angels formed a perimeter, these outlaws becoming protectors of truth. The broadcast went global within hours. #Justice for Keisha trending worldwide. The evidence Sarah had risked everything to save was digitized, uploaded, spread beyond any possibility of suppression. Back in Detroit, Morrison's empire crumbled in real time. Federal agents, the clean ones from outside the corrupted system, descended like locusts. Arrests began, the police chief taken from his home in handcuffs, city councilman Perp walked past cameras, Morrison himself caught trying to flee to a non-extradition country. But Sarah's fight had taken its toll. In the small Canadian hospital where they'd taken her after the interview, she lay dying. The gunshot had done more damage than Doc's field medicine could fix, and the days of running had pushed her body beyond its limits. Tank sat beside her bed, this hardened biker holding the hand of a dying maid. "Did we do it?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Yeah," Tank said, his own voice rough. "Morrison's done. They're all done. Keisha's story is everywhere." Sarah smiled. She always wanted to change the world. She did. "Through you." "Through all of us," Sarah corrected. She looked at Tank with fading eyes. "You angels, you were the answer to a mother's prayer." Tank had to look away. In 30 years of riding, through wars and prison and loss, he'd never cried. He cried now. "Will you do something for me?" Sarah asked. "Anything. When they bury me, make sure it's next to my baby. And tell people I wasn't just a maid. Tell them I was Keisha Mitchell's mother." "I'll tell them you were a warrior," Tank promised. Sarah's hand went slack in his. The funeral was unlike anything Detroit had seen. Thousands came, the invisible people, the maids and janitors and security guards who kept the city running. They came for Sarah, who'd seen what others missed. They came for Keisha, who'd died for truth. And surprisingly, they came for the angels, who'd risked everything for strangers. Tank spoke at the service, uncomfortable in the church but determined to keep his promise. "Sarah Mitchell saw things," he said simply. "She saw corruption where others saw success. She saw murder where others saw accident. She saw that sometimes, justice needs outlaws to deliver it." He paused, looking at the sea of faces. She wasn't just a maid. She was a mother, a fighter, a hero. She was Keisha Mitchell's mother, and she changed everything. The angels provided security for the burial, a leather-clad honor guard for a woman who'd worn a different uniform. As they lowered Sarah's casket next to her daughter's, Tank placed a small angel pin on the coffin, the kind members gave to their families. "Ride free, sister," he murmured. In the weeks that followed, the revelations from Sarah's evidence continued. The corruption went deeper than anyone imagined, reaching into state government, federal agencies, corporate boardrooms. Dozens were arrested, millions recovered, systems reformed. Elena Rodriguez won a Pulitzer for her coverage, but she dedicated it to Keisha Mitchell. "The real journalist," she said in her acceptance speech. And to her mother, who finished the story. The Hell's Angels faced their own reckoning. Some wanted them prosecuted for harboring a fugitive, for the shootout at the clubhouse. But public opinion had shifted. These weren't just outlaws anymore, they were the ones who'd stood up when the system failed. Charges were quietly dropped, though the scrutiny remained. Tank found himself changed. The rage that had driven him for decades had transformed into something else. He started visiting schools, talking to kids about Keisha and Sarah, about courage and seeing clearly. The giant biker in leather became an unlikely advocate for justice. "Everyone's got power," he'd tell the wide-eyed students. "The question is whether you use it to protect or to prey." 1 year later, on the anniversary of Sarah's death, something remarkable happened. The Morrison Industries building, seized by the government and sold, reopened as the Keisha Mitchell Center for Investigative Journalism. Where executives had once planned crimes, young journalists now learned to expose them. Tank stood at the dedication, watching Elena Rodriguez cut the ribbon. In the crowd, he spotted familiar faces: Doc, Inc., Chains, other brothers who'd risked everything for a stranger's truth. But it was the other faces that moved him. The maids, the janitors, the invisible army that kept the city running. They stood taller now, looked people in the eye. Sarah's courage had reminded them they weren't just background noise in other people's stories. A young woman approached Tank after the ceremony. She wore a press badge, carried a notebook. "I'm Aisha," she said. "I was Keisha's roommate. I wanted to thank you." "Nothing to thank me for." "You're wrong," Aisha insisted. "You showed us that sometimes angels wear leather instead of wings. That courage comes from unexpected places." She paused. "I'm writing a story about what happened. Would you talk to me?" Tank considered. The club had rules about talking to press. But then he thought about Sarah, bleeding and desperate, trusting outlaws with her truth. "Yeah," he said. "I'll talk." They sat in the center's cafe, where Keisha's photo hung on the wall, bright smile, fierce eyes, ready to change the world. Tank told the story from his perspective, about the night a maid's courage challenged everything he thought he knew. "She called us angels," he said. "But she was the one who fell from heaven to deliver justice." Aisha wrote quickly, capturing every word. "What changed you the most?" Tank was quiet for a long moment. "I spent my whole life thinking power came from fear. From being the baddest man in the room. But Sarah, she had no power at all. Just truth and determination. And she brought down an empire." He looked at Keisha's photo. "Real power isn't making people afraid. It's making them brave." As he left the center, Tank's phone buzzed. Reaper, texting about a club meeting. Normal business, normal life. But nothing was normal anymore. The world had shifted, revealed its hidden layers. Outside, a woman in a maid's uniform was entering the building, probably to clean after the dedication ceremony. Tank stopped her. "Ma'am," he said, the word feeling strange but right. "Thank you for your service." She looked confused, then smiled. "Just doing my job." "No," Tank said, thinking of Sarah. "You're doing more than that. You're keeping the world running while nobody notices. That's its own kind of heroism." He handed her a card, his number at the clubhouse. "Anyone gives you trouble, anyone treats you as less than, you call. The angels remember our debts." The woman took the card, eyes wide. As Tank walked away, he heard her whisper to a colleague, "Did that biker just?" "Yeah," her friend replied. "Things are different now. Ever since the Mitchell case." Tank smiled. Sarah had wanted her daughter's story told, wanted the invisible to be seen. In death, she'd achieved more than she'd ever dreamed. At the clubhouse, the brothers were gathered around the bar. The news was on, another corruption scandal exposed, another journalist citing the Mitchell case as inspiration. "We did good," Ink said, raising a beer. "Sarah did good," Tank corrected. "We just got out of her way." Reaper stood, commanding attention. "Brothers, we've voted. The club's establishing a fund, the Sarah Mitchell Justice Fund. Any parent who loses a kid to the system, any family fighting corruption, they come to us. We help." The vote was unanimous. Even the hardest among them had been changed by a maid's courage. That night, Tank rode alone through Detroit streets. Past the courthouse where Morrison was being tried. Past the newspaper where Keisha had dreamed of working. Past the small apartment where Sarah had raised her daughter with love and hope. He stopped at their graves, side by side in a quiet corner of the cemetery. Someone had left fresh flowers, they always did now. The headstones were simple but dignified. Keisha's read, "Truth Seeker." Sarah's read, "Truth Keeper." Tank pulled out a leather bag from his saddlebag, not the one Sarah had carried, but one just like it. Inside were letters from people across the country, thanking Sarah for her courage, sharing their own stories of fighting corruption, promising to keep watching, keep speaking. "Thought you should have these," he said to the graves. "Proof that you changed things. Proof that people see now." The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment, Tank could almost hear Sarah's voice, "They thought I was invisible." "Not anymore," Tank replied. "Never again." As he rode away, the city lights reflected off his chrome, creating brief halos in the darkness. The Hells Angels had always been about brotherhood, about loyalty to each other. But Sarah Mitchell had taught them something new, that sometimes brotherhood extended beyond leather cuts and club rules. Sometimes it meant standing for those who couldn't stand alone. Back at the clubhouse, Tank found a young woman waiting, nervous but determined. She clutched a folder of documents, looking around at the bikers with a mixture of fear and hope. "My brother," she began. "He was killed. They said gang violence, but he was investigating wage theft at the factory. I have proof, but no one will listen." Tank exchanged glances with his brothers. They all saw it, another Sarah, another truth that needed telling. "Sit down," Tank said gently. "Tell us everything. And ma'am, you're not invisible here." As she began her story, the angels listened. They'd become something they'd never expected, not just outlaws, but outcasts who protected other outcasts. The leather bag Sarah had carried that night had contained more than evidence. It had contained a revolution of sight, a demand that the invisible be seen. And in a clubhouse on the outskirts of Detroit, among men society had written off as criminals, that revolution continued. One story at a time. One truth at a time. One act of unexpected courage at a time. The news would never report it quite right. They'd focus on the sensational, bikers and bullets and border runs. But the real story was simpler and more profound. A maid had seen clearly, a mother had fought fiercely, and angels had answered a desperate prayer. In the end, the leather bag's greatest revelation wasn't about corruption or crime. It was about the power of the powerless when someone finally stops to see them. Sarah Mitchell had begged the Hells Angels for help, and when they'd opened her bag, the truth hadn't just left them silent, it had given them a new voice. And they would use it to ensure that never again would the invisible remain unseen.